Who are you to demand anything? I run this town. You're just a bunch of low-income nobodies.
Election in November.
What? Again? This stupid country.
Election in November. Just like the title says, the season has begun, so we'll be going over everything you need to know to at least get started with this season. We're not going to go into much detail because we don't have time, but we are going to touch up on just about everybody that's running for office that would affect some folks here in New Milford. And there's kind of a lot because the districts have been redrawn at the local level, at least in terms of the House here in Connecticut. So there's kind of a lot to go over. And there's a reason we're going to be going over that, and that is because the party, capital T, capital P, has lost their minds yet again. And before we get started into all of that, I want to first, of course, acknowledge the folks that I have been watching and continue to watch, and everyone in the community who knows me and who has been making especially the recommendations for my landscaping services to the rest of the community. It's become a full-time job at this point, and I've gotten to a point where I am full-on hiring folks. So I want to send a special shout-out to the community and a special thanks to the community who continues to recommend me and my services for that work. And on that note, in case you missed it, here's a brief touch-up on some of the things I've done. Here are some irises that I planted for a client last summer that have come to bloom and look really nice. Yes, there is some music over this. It is a song which is 117 years old and got me a copyright strike last time I did this. So we're going to have the music real quiet, even though it is obviously in public domain. Folks, enjoy some irises. Yeah, that was a 25-second excerpt from Debussy's Clair de Lune. Yes, it is a piece of classical work that was released way, way, way before the copyright laws that in this country came to existence, which were the first copyright laws in the world to come into existence. So if anyone on YouTube or Facebook is watching, if the bots are going to be able to scroll through this, it is obviously public domain. And yes, I will be appealing that decision if I get booted. And on that note, let's see if I got booted. No, I didn't get booted. So we'll be able to continue the stream, thank God. And for those who are new to the show, yes, we do this live. And for a reason, we're going to come back to that later on tonight. But if you prefer to watch on YouTube, channel is on YouTube. If you link is in this video's description to watch on YouTube. If you'd prefer to watch on Facebook, link is in this video's description to join in on the conversation here on Facebook as well. You'll get the better, YouTube does have the better compression, so it'll be a little bit better video on YouTube. So folks, if you're not liking what you're seeing on Facebook is a pain in the butt to stream to. So check out the live stream on YouTube. Link, again, is in this video's description. Do check it out. And of course, always a thank you to the folks who watch and the new folks who are new. Yes, we do a live Q&A at the end of the show. Stick around. This one might be a long one, no. So who knows what we wind up getting out of all of that. And where we're actually going to start is because we're going to continue to have this stupid conversation, the same conversation we had last week, because people just don't get it. Again, if go to YouTube, go to my channel, check out the video from last week. Everything we're going to go over in terms of the factual base, we already evidenced last week. We already put everybody to sleep with data. But in response to that, we have to continue that conversation from Uvalde and from Buffalo, and continuing from a few weeks ago before we get into that, and you'll see how this segues nicely into that. Some things to look forward to coming up. Tuesday night, there's going to be a special Board of Education meeting to review Superintendent DeCorpo's contract and to conduct her performance review. Let me get up the window for that. That you can see the agenda is here. And I'll go ahead and share the link to that meeting. That's 5:30 on Tuesday night. Dumping this link into YouTube, dumping this link into Facebook so you guys can follow along. Link is in the chat now. That'll also be followed by the regular meeting at 7 o'clock. I'll pull that up in just a minute here. But real quick, The superintendent, the only thing that's in this special meeting is a call to order where they have the Pledge of Allegiance, public comment, and they have the 3-minute time limit. And B, if a member of the public comments about the performance of an employee or a board member, whether positive, negative, or neutral, and whether named or not, the board shall not respond to such comments unless the topic is an explicit item on the agenda and the employee or the board member has been provided with the requisite notice and due process required by law. Similarly, in accordance with federal law pertaining to student confidentiality, the board shall not respond to or otherwise discuss any comments that might be pertaining to students. Obviously, this is not specific to public comment. In public comment, this is your opportunity from the public to comment on, there's kind of broad discretion that the chair has, in this case, Wendy Fallenbach, as to what you can comment about. The 3-minute time limit can be extended in certain cases if the chair so chooses. There's a lot of discretion. We've talked about this on the show. But the point is that they're going to have that review. And I know that we talked about it, there's been a full-on petition to ouster her we went over it. We went over it. And I'll give you my thoughts on the matter just really briefly. A lot of people complained about the revolving door at the Milford Public Schools and with the New Milford Board of Education. There has been no better example of a revolving door. No door has turned over in the way that the door of the superintendent has turned over. This position before Mr. Corpo took it over was when we had something like 6 in the course of like 3.5 years. So if nothing else, the position has provided her assumption of that position has provided stability in the position that most requires that level of stability. Before we get into the necessary details in terms of her performance, in my eyes, let's just have a brief conversation about what's going on here, because as the meeting explains, the next item on the agenda is discussion and possible action. Let's bring us back up so you guys can follow along, and let's go ahead and zoom in so you guys can see this a little bit better. Discussion concerning the employment, evaluation, and contract of the superintendent. The board intends to conduct this discussion in executive session. So that means privately and behind closed doors. Upon exiting executive session, the board may take action upon such discussion. Now, briefly, they are not allowed to take action or make any decisions outside of the public, outside of the view of the public. However, when it comes to the actual discussion of the review, obviously that's going to be happening behind closed doors. And there's a reason for that. And that is that you don't want to, there's 2 reasons for that. Number one, there's really 3 reasons for that, but the first reason is kind of a 1A and a 1B. It's the same reason that you don't discuss security specifics in public. You don't want to have a gaming of the system. You don't want to have the person you may be negotiating against in terms of a contract dispute. You don't want to have that person have the negotiative leverage of the rationale that isn't going to be made public, of the nuanced and specific discussion that takes place. The other thing is that you don't want to be held hostage by the public in the moment. At an election is different, right? If the public is going to hold you hostage at an election, that's completely different. That's what those elections are there to do. But when it comes to being able to make comment during these meetings, that it may be extremely critical. It may be things that they may be privy to things that we don't know and that we're not even allowed legally to know, and for good reason, that, may be a reason to have a negative or a positive review. For example, how a certain employee's termination was handled. If there was a termination that needed to take place and you need to be able to have a frank conversation of that termination. Let's say there was a teacher that was diddling kids and there was information that came out about that you can't discuss in the public light in terms of, the protection of the child. So in this case, it's going to be, I don't know if the Board of Ed in that circumstance, let's say, could reveal specific information about the minor in question because they're a minor and because of the legal protections the minor has in that case. So there may be something that is specific. It may be in terms of how if there was a contractor, right, and there was a series of contractors, and there was a negotiation that took place to get something done in terms of third-party service, in terms of a contracted job or work that was done. Or, God forbid, if a contractor sets fire to the roof, and there are certain conversations that need to be had behind closed doors about how we're going to handle this strategically, that you might want to complement you might want to give credit to the superintendent on that you really can't have in the public light. So again, not only is there information that they are privy to that we can't have out in the public from a strategic standpoint, right? They also can't be held hostage by the public. You want the people so there's a lot of people that would be in the room in that circumstance that would want her fired. So you would want to have folks like Amy Fotopoulos be able to go to the podium and not necessarily go to the podium. Let's say the people on the Board of Ed. You want them to not be held hostage by the public in the moment. If they have something that they need to be able to say, you need to have them be able to say that. And what the public has demonstrated at the last Board of Education meeting, well, maybe the last one, but the one before that, we showed the meeting, we showed clips of it. If there's just going to be nonstop outbursts and interruptions, and there's going to be if it's going to just be impossible to actually conduct the performance review, then you can't be held hostage by the mob in that case. It's also illegal. It's also illegal for them to be having these performance evaluations in public, as per the contract negotiations with the Board of Education's employees. So there is a reason to be having this behind the evaluation itself. The conducting of the evaluation itself behind closed doors. Obviously, in the case of Mr. Corpo, there's a good rationale then to release the evaluation into the public domain. And of course, the final decisions have to be made, not only released in public, but be made in public. But again, there's a reason the actual process itself is happening. The actual deliberations are happening behind closed doors and at least in part. And again, if we're going to get into Ms. DeCorpo herself, we've kind of already done this before, and we've kind of talked about all of this already. So let me bring that video up. We talked about this on an earlier episode of the Mike Sennello Show from April 25th, 2022. This is actually the excerpt from the show where we talked about this, where we were talking about folks demanding for Mr. Corpo's job. And, we talked about how there's perhaps the community ought to at least take a breath before you ask for somebody's job, and in a position that, again, requires the greatest degree of stability of any of these positions. And the point is, perhaps this is time to take a breath. And again, this is not, as I said in this video, this is not going to be an endorsement of DeCorpo, but as far as my take on the matter is concerned, yes, it is, in terms of the main argument, we talked about this on this show. We talked about this in this video that I'm showing you right now. The main argument that is made, this was the earlier show. This is the show we made after that video. The main argument that was made by Amy Fotopoulos, which I discussed here, and I'll put the links in the comments in here. So this is the video where we talked about when the news was first breaking about the petition that was making its way around. When we first talked about this, here we go. That's that link. That's on Facebook. This one is now in YouTube. Leslie Anderson Sarich, we aren't voting on her contract this Tuesday, just voting to submit our final review. Her contract vote is 6/14, so that clarifies things. However, I would imagine this is, in terms of the final review, this is basically the performance review. And this is the video, this is with the timestamp. This is us agreeing, God forbid, with Amy Fotopoulos in what she was saying in defense of the position in terms of Alicia DeCorpo. Not necessarily that she's, and I kind of don't agree with her necessarily that DeCorpo has done a good job, but certainly the demands for her termination are really, really, really unevidenced and unwarranted. The other thing to take under consideration is that it's expensive as hell to hire this position, as we found out through the revolving door. And again, this is the one position where kids and the administrators and the administration in general needs consistency more than any other position. If we're going to talk baseball, this is the general manager and this is the head coach. They may be the same person, but it's at least the general manager. If we're talking about a football team, right, this is the general manager of the football team. You don't have to have the same running back each year. You don't have to have the same quarterback each year. You don't have to have the same starting pitching rotation each year. But what you absolutely have to have is some sort of organization, some sort of structure that the people underneath that position can know from one day, week, month, and year to the next is going to have some degree of consistency so you can build in practice the final result based on those fundamental principles. And if the core fundamental principles are just wrong, are just horribly, horribly wrong, and they do have to be horribly, horribly wrong, then you can go try and find somebody who's got better fundamentals, which the Giants did, which the New York Mets did, right? And these top level positions, there's a reason that things like ownership takes forever to change hands. There's a reason that general managers, generally speaking, have a much longer leash than wide receivers, than left fielders. There's a reason for all of that. And in this case, in both of those super high level positions, you don't fire unless you either have a new hire in mind, which is fine, or you have truly gross incompetence. Right? You have a team that goes to the playoffs 3 years in a row, and then for the next 3 years is in the bottom of the NFC East and cannot get to the 6-win mark. Just can't do it. Is in, the top 5 positions in the draft every single year for years and years and years on end. And there's glaring holes that are just not being addressed. We talked about how, like, in defense of Amy Fotopoulos, who says the right things, we're not talking about truly gross incompetence when it comes to DeCorpo. We're not talking about, at the top level, some sort of catastrophic failure. We're not talking about somebody who's hiring teachers that just straight up won't teach, who's taken a position of hiring teachers that just won't teach. But she's not even really doing most of the hiring of the teachers. This would be somebody who would be grossly negligent in the contract negotiations with the union, let's say. Somebody who, let's say, is revealing the position of the Board of Ed when it comes to contract negotiations beforehand. This is like truly fireable offense. Again, unless you have somebody else in mind, to be left with nobody is to be left with worse than a even pretty bad superintendent. Again, everybody needs some consistency. And everything that was in that petition that was circulating that we talked about was out of line in asking for her job. This is not in defense of DeCorpo. I'm saying that the rationales people have used to ask for her job are just insufficient for asking for that type of job. And on that note, at the Board of Ed meeting that happened last week, I believe it was a subcommittee hearing. The public, because I know what the public comment's going to be when it comes to Mr. Corpo. I know what it's going to be. You want her head. There are a lot of people in this town that just want her head. And over what I consider to be petty contrivances that to me are mostly forgivable because of COVID, right? Yeah, when it came to COVID, we were in and out of the classroom constantly. You're going from virtual classroom to in-person classroom, and it was a mess. And there's a reason for that, and that is because Hartford demanded it. And if you're going to say the reason is Hartford demanded it, fine. But now that we're in 2022, we're out of COVID. Now we got to get the ship in order. Now I've got to get the ship straight, which is fine. If the ship isn't going to get straight, that's fine. And I know what the public comment's going to be in that meeting. And I know what the public comment was at the last meeting, which I believe was a subcommittee meeting, so there was no cameras. We haven't gotten a meeting minutes yet. But the public comment was the public comment you would expect in response to what we've talked about, knee-jerk politics, get guns out of schools. It's been the response to Uvalde, and it's been exactly what you expected. And we talked about this last week. I created the excerpt so everybody can have the 54 minutes. As you can see, 54 minutes of that conversation. The gun isn't the problem. I'll drop the link in the comments right now into the chat. Leslie has said correct, Mike. So yeah, everything I just said about the meetings coming forward with the Board of Ed is correct. And I would expect at some point that there's going to be this conversation as well. And they probably already had it when it comes to school security. And that conversation was had, from what I understand, after public comment, because you have to have public comment at these meetings, and you should have public comment at all of these meetings, or at least you should allow it. Obviously, this conversation is going to be had behind closed doors. And there's a reason for that. We talked about that last week, and that is, again, specific security protocol cannot be released to the public. You can't release that to the public. If there's going to be somebody who's going to shoot up a school in New Milford, which we talked about, again, extraordinarily rare and insanely unlikely. Way, way, way less likely than hitting the Powerball jackpot. Way less likely. We talked about that. Right? We're talking about tiny, tiny, tiny fractions of a percent it's a tiny, 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 tiny fractions of a percent of a tiny, tiny, tiny fractions of a percent of shootings in general, which is a tiny fraction of a percent of the risk of death. So the risk of this taking place in New Milford, especially even without context, even without doing your independent variable control, is insanely low. We talked about that last week on last week's show. We went through the data. We put everybody to sleep with the actual data from the case, from this case. And again, the lesson that I was really hoping people would get, and they didn't, was reactionary politics are the worst politics, number one. And number two, Uvalde is a case of, I cannot think of a better example for an absolutist take on the Second Amendment. What happened in Texas to me seems to be, in terms of the facts of the case, which we went over on last week's show, the best case for the Second Amendment I have ever seen. And we showed the charts. The overwhelming majority of gun usage outside of target shooting and hunting, the overwhelming majority of it, it's like 10-to-1 uses, are in defense. They're in defense. And obviously, if there's no way to defend yourself, which is what the Second Amendment is, the Second Amendment is nothing more than a protection of your right to defend your existence. The only right that supersedes that is the right to conceive of your own existence. So you have the right to have the thing, and now you have the right to defend the thing. That's why they're 1 and 2. First, the First Amendment is really not a protection on speech, but a protection on the agency of the mind, a protection of thought for all intents and purposes. It's a protection of the right to have in your mind these ideas, which are the thing that defines the essence of a human being. It's the thing that separates human beings from the entire rest of the living world, the fact that we have agency. And it's the fact that we have agency that we derive these rights from. Not the Constitution, not some document, not some decree. No, it comes from the ether. It pre-exists government. And again, this is why the listing of the enumeration of these rights in the Bill of Rights is 1 and 2. And of course, the two lessons being reactionary politics are the worst politics and Second Amendment good, the mayor of this town has actually shown how when it comes to policy in this town, when it comes to the people you have voted for in November, there seems to be at least some agreement on that matter. And that's because for those of you who voted in favor of the passing of the budget this year, that happened just a few weeks ago, we talked about this on the show. We talked about this last week. One of the things that was included in that budget was an increase in the number of armed school security officers. It was built into the budget. It's been part of the plans moving forward for a few years now. And the mayor has just posted that let me get that up. I'm sure you guys have seen this post, that the town of Milford is looking to hire some armed school security officers. I have it on good accord. I have it on good account that you do not have to be a police officer. You do not have to be a former police officer, that the requirements for qualifying for an armed school security officer are not as stringent necessarily as the requirements to be a police officer, because again, you've got one thing that you're training people to do, one thing that you're training people to defend, which to me makes a whole lot of sense. But of course, like I said, the response to all of this from the proverbial other side has been as insane as it has ever been. So, we're going to start right here with this post. Let's see what the community has said about this. The overwhelming majority of the community, by the way, I should turn notifications off. The overwhelming majority of the community, by the way, agrees with this and considers it an agreeable decision, because obviously, if you have more defense in a school, you have more ability to defend the kids in the school. So let's just start off. Let's zoom in a little bit so folks can see. Amy Dietz, this is one of the most liked and most responded to, at least, although the breakdown is not exactly perfectly in line. This has been basically the spirit of the response to this outside of, well, those who agree with Pete. Why do we think this is a good idea? We all just saw what happened in Uvalde. The armed police waited almost an hour for backup while children were murdered. More guns is not the answer. Of course more guns is the answer. And here's why more guns is the answer. This would not be news if the parents were armed like the military. The reason this is news is because the cops failed in performing their duty. It's not because gun. It's because the cops in this case, in this wonderful anecdote, failed. And if you're going to say that this anecdote, which is statistically, and we went over this, not a reflection of population level trends. We went over all the data last week. We ran the show an hour long going through the boring data and facts in the matter. If the parents were armed like the military, either the police at the barricade would have stood down or they would have been forced to stand down. They would have been forced to surrender. The parents would have blown through that barricade with tanks and howitzers, waltzed in the building, and shot the kid. If the government isn't going to do your job, by the way, again, biggest take out of all of this, get your kids out of public school. This is not me saying the Milford Public School's bad. This is me saying there are critical flaws built into the nature of public schooling that aren't there in private school. And we went over the data. It's not there in private school. We went over the data. It's not there in homeschooling. Homeschools are not getting shot up for being schools. And because there's so few kids in homeschooling, the people that want to get the attention because of body count aren't going to be able to get the attention because of body count. Right? The other thing I said is reactionary politics. One of the things you can do to stymie all of this is not cover it. And that's exactly what we're doing. That's exactly what we're doing here. I'm covering it because the reaction has been to cover it, and the reaction has been insane. No, the good guy with the gun meme was not disproved by this case. In fact, it was proved by it. Because what wound up happening is that some off-duty Border Patrol officer got a text from his wife saying that this was happening, was getting a haircut at the time, stood up in the middle of the haircut, told the barber to stop giving him a haircut, borrowed the barber's shotgun, and went into the building with, from what I can understand, a wrangled up posse of Border Patrol agents, and they were the ones that subdued the target. They were the ones that wound up engaging with the target. They were the ones that said, nah, we're not sitting on our hands in this one. And that's because, like I said, any reasonable parent is going to be doing that in that situation. So I would also agree that police should not have a barricaded, when it comes to schools, when it comes to schooling and children, because this is the response that every rational adult is going to take. Like every bullet that I take is a bullet the kids don't have to take. So even if I'm going in unarmed and just war of attritioning my way into the building, he's only got so many bullets. He's only got so many rounds. So I'm going to take as many as I can if that's what it takes. And every adult agrees with me. Every single one. So the police who signed up to be police, who signed up for this job, when it comes to schooling, should not. I really hope New Milford Police is listening to this. And don't tell me if this is the case. But for the love of God, do not have a barricaded, was a barricaded individual or something like that situation. No. Your job when a school is getting shot up is to go and kill the guy. End of story. End of story. Don't waste your life. Don't waste the risk on trying to apprehend and arrest the guy unless he completely surrenders. Completely just lies on the ground with his hands in his back. No guns anywhere near him, butt naked, so he couldn't possibly be hiding anything. No. Otherwise, it's just what the parents would do if they were armed. And that is break through the police barricade and turn his chest into lead. Right? Again, I can't think of a better example of the Second Amendment. If there was a teacher that was armed, that was strapped like Neo from the Matrix, do you think that this would even be a story? Because if there was a teacher that was strapped like Neo from the Matrix, right? Do you think that teacher is hesitating? No, they're kicking the door in. They're breaking the glass with the butt of the gun, right? On that door. They're reaching through the glass, cutting up their arm, probably taking a few rounds of shrapnel in the meantime, unlocking the door, kicking it in, and just unloading on the guy. And this wouldn't be news. This wouldn't be a story. The fact that the cops failed in protecting you and to protecting the people you care about in your own defense is the reason we have the Second Amendment. When government fails to do the thing that you're entitled to, when government won't do the basic thing, which is defend the lives of the innocent, then obviously it's your right to do that. And if that requires that you have guns to do that as an individual, then you should have guns so you could do that as an individual, which is exactly how the Second Amendment is worded. Again, I can't think of a better example. I can't think of a case that's better, that's more in favor of that's more in favor of the Second Amendment than what happened in Uvalde. And, again, Pat Erickson, let's bring this up. That department was 8 officers in a very small town. The issue was the chief told them to stand down. 100% true. I can guarantee Spencer would never do that. Spencer, don't comment. But if you're watching, damn right. Damn right. You better not. If this ever happened here in New Milford, you send in every officer you can without waiting, without hesitation. Don't wait for a SWAT team. Just send them in. Their job, they're the ones carrying a gun. They're the ones wearing bulletproof vests. They're the ones who signed up for that job. When it comes to kids, you send them in. Now, again, we talked about this. If it's a DMV hostage situation, it's a little bit different. We're dealing with adults in the room, right? I don't know that your average adult would barge into the DMV and just take bullets so that the adults in the DMV also don't have to take bullets. I don't think that's the calculus that everybody's going through when it comes to something like that. But the comments don't stop there. Towards the end of these comments, we get Nikki Arcamone Smith. So let's see what she has to say. This is what we need. More guns are not the answer. So this being the link she's got right there, is the funds we used to install turf fields, so excuse the grammar, are the funds we used to install the turf fields allowed to be used for something like this? This being what she's got in this link. It should be. Excellent whataboutism, excellent pivot, but let's go to what this video shows. Let's go to this video and let's go ahead and watch it. Turn the sound on. It's 2 minutes, 20 seconds long. So first things first, cameras in school are something that the proverbial right wing has been in favor of for years, and the proverbial left wing has been opposed to. So keep that in mind as we continue on the show. So some of these measures are measures that, by the way, cost an absolute unconscionable fortune. And telling teachers that they can strap themselves costs us nothing. Allowing the Second Amendment to apply to schools so that potential school shooters, are going to be dealing with the fact that, hey, you know what? There might be more guns in the hands of teachers and the people you're trying to shoot than you have, right? You may have to actually do what Neo did at the end of The Matrix to get into a school. This is what I talked about. This is not my first goal, but obviously the hardening of schools is something that obviously should be taking place. And either the schools are war zones or they're not. They can't simultaneously be both. And if they're not war zones, then we can stop this conversation right here dead. And we can end this baloney about destroying the Second Amendment. Oh my God. This seems like ridiculous excess to avoid just saying, you know what, teachers, if you want to get trained, certified, et cetera, to be strapped and to concealed carry, not to open carry, to concealed carry. And the reason you would want to concealed carry is so that the shooters don't know who's packing heat. So that this is as hardened to target as possible. So that somebody who comes into the building looking to do what happened in Uvalde, right? Again, The obvious solution is to institutionalize these people. Red flag laws aren't going to work on this matter. We talked about this last show. He's just going to get his hands on the gun illegally somehow. He's just going to break the law. If he's going to break the law, he's going to break the law. So this seems like a preposterous extreme to avoid saying, you know what, teachers, if you want to carry, you can go ahead and carry. And the Looney Tunes, the left allowed to we shut down facilities like the upstate New York mental institution in Binghamton, New York. I went to school there. I saw what happened when you released these crazies on the street because it's not politically correct. My fifis, my feels, therefore they can't be locked up. No, these people need to be institutionalized. And if we had the systems we had in place to institutionalize these type of wackos from the 1970s and 80s, this guy wouldn't have got his hand on a gun because he would have been behind concrete. He would have been in a building made of nothing but concrete and steel and razor wire. That's how you keep guns out of criminals' hands. Because if you just let them roam the streets, they are going to go to the street. Wait a minute. He's playing the intruder. These windows have glass on them. Is the intruder really not just going to bash in those windows? Bash in that glass? Reach in and unlock the doors? And then all of these kids are just piled up in a corner like sitting goddamn ducks? I'm sorry, but New Milford Board of Ed, the folks that are on the Board of Ed, if you are seeing this, if you are watching this, again, do not reveal your security strategies. But for the love of God, what you should be doing is getting the kids out of the damn room. Get the kids out of the damn room. The obvious thing you do is the same thing you would do in a fire drill in optimal situations. You have doors that close, you section off the building, you lock the building. And you lock the building so that the shooter can only stay in one area and everyone else leaves. And then once the building is evacuated, you unlock those doors. Obviously, you have some mechanism so that things like the police can get through those doors. Obviously, you have some mechanism so that there's some sort of like one-way entry or something through those doors. It's the same thing you do with fires. Same thing you do with fires. If you don't want the fire to get to the other end of the building, you make sure the fire can't go anywhere. And then the entire rest of school is evacuated. But there's glass. They're locked. That's going to be the stop? Oh my God. Jesus Christ. I mean, these are insane lengths to avoid saying just let the carries. And this is fine, but this seems like a needlessly expensive, colossal waste of money, and as a way to avoid just saying let the teachers carry, let the staff carry, let the staff concealed carry, let them go through their pistol permit training. Let them go through some vetting process with the Board of Education. Let them carry. Like, yeah, okay, this is neat, but like, I wonder how many times kids pull fire alarms, and versus how many times there's actually a fire in the building and the alarm goes off. Because when I was in school, if there was an actual fire, unless you could see the flames and the smoke, no one was taking it seriously because of how often these things go off for unintentionally. Or go off because of a fire drill, or go off because there's a student who wants to get out of a test and just pulls the fire alarm. I can't imagine that this isn't going to get at least used improperly way more times than it's been used properly. Instead of going into the damn building? Like, none of this is useful until you have the gun. None of this is useful, really, in the end. None of this stops this, in the end, until somebody goes in packing heat and puts one in his chest. $400,000! $400,000 at this tiny, tiny, tiny little county in Texas. First things first, if this is New Milford, you know that's going to be like $4.5 freaking million, number one. And number two, what are you buying with that? What are you buying with that? Does this not seem like ridiculous excess to avoid much cheaper and much more obvious solutions? I mean, look at that. Time out. Let's see if we can freeze frame on that. How many kids can you kill with 3 bullets here? How many kids, if you get into that room, which should be not that difficult, because again, you break the glass, you unlock the door from the inside. Now, if you break the glass and go to unlock the door, and that teacher right there, the one on the left, this one right here that you guys can see, if what's in her hands is an AR-15, then you can see him reaching in to unlock the door, aim at the crack of the door, and the moment the door cracks open, ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. Imagine if she was carrying an M16, a fully automatic rifle. Imagine if it had 100 rounds. You think she's going to miss then? Could she get away with spray and pray at that point? This is the insanity that's coming from the opposition to the most obvious solutions that there obviously are. For example, that instead of red flagging somebody so he can't buy a gun legally, which he'll just do illegally, if he's that wild, if he's that insane, his parents at least should be allowed to say, off to the institution. And not for like some sort of 30-day probationary rehab period. I mean, decades. Decades. We read the Buffalo Shooters Manifesto. People knew this guy wasn't that much of a nut job. And when you're that much of a nut job, that doesn't fix itself in 30 days. If that fixes itself in 30 freaking years. 30 freaking years. And we talked about how if you're not willing to send somebody out of polite society and out of civilized society for decades, then maybe the thing shouldn't be illegal. Which, again, we talked about. There's a lot of things where you go to jail for like 1 to 3 years. The recidivism rate when it comes to violent crime is insane. Insane. And yet, the opposition, the obvious thing in these situations is when you have somebody who is a violent criminal, you have a mountain of evidence against him. Even if it's a first-time offense, you don't give him bail. You remand him without bail. And the political opposition to all of this wants to get rid of that. It's capital T, capital P, the party in New York that wants to get rid of these bail policies and just have everyone roll in the streets. And again, the insanity of this response. We went over the data. You can go through the data. You can go through the data and pick out what is obviously going to be like the policy positions that would actually work in this matter. And we talked about it last week's show. Again, we put people to sleep with it. But that's not what's going to happen here. And this is why reactionary politics are the worst politics. You need to do your homework, and which means you need to take a deep breath instead of knee-jerking to a response. Because when you knee-jerk to a response, you get crappy policy and you get insane responses. And we're in New Milford where, of course, the most insane responses are going to be from the Milford DTC. And their most insane responses are going to be on Twitter. Now, before we go through all of this, I wouldn't normally do this. Because, and I've said this a million times, I don't believe that Democrats in this town I don't believe that they're in line perfectly in lockstep with the policy prescriptions of the DTC leadership. And I don't believe that the Democrats in this town are the Vosh Democrats or are the AOC Democrats. I do believe that these are the Democrats that would have voted for Democrats in the 90s and would still vote for those Democrats from the 90s whose policy prescriptions would put them in line with Republicans at this point. So this is not me saying Democrats bad, but this is the NMDTC Twitter page. And again, we're going to go through some retweets. Normally I wouldn't give retweets coverage because they're retweets. But there's enough of this to build an obvious ethos, to build an obvious spirit of the thing. And this all starts in response, of course, we're going to go in chronological order, which also happens to be the order of least brings us from insane to completely psycho, completely on Mars. And of course, because we're starting with chronology, we're going to start with the DTC response to what happened in Buffalo. And this is a retweet from the New Milford DTC. The families of the victims of today's mass shooting in Buffalo at the hands of a white supremacist who espoused Tucker Carlson's. We talked about this. The Buffalo shooter was a white supremacist who espoused Tucker Carlson's white replacement theory right replacement theory, she'd immediately file a class action lawsuit against Tucker and Fox News for inspiring the mass shooter's heinous act. No. This is just, first things first, all Republicans are Nazis. All Republicans are white supremacists. Does this sound familiar, folks? Does this sound familiar? Have the DTCs walked back their position in any way from last year? Where the reaction was 73 to 27? No, they've doubled down on it. And in fact, taken it to its logical end. The white replacement theory is a theory of the left. Tucker Carlson was just simply showing the white replacement theory. It's a theory that's being put to practice by Democrats, by the left wing. And they're saying that this is what's happening. It's not Tucker Carlson saying something white supremacist, saying that white people are better. It's him saying, you guys are the ones who are prescribing basically a minority nationalism. It's no longer black nationalism. It's just hatred of white. It's just what we're going to do is, in order to win elections, what we're going to do is say, if you ain't Democrat, you ain't black. And in saying that, what we're going to do is convince minorities that there is something of value. There's a value judgment that can be made upon people based on race, which is the very definition of racism. All Tucker Carlson was doing in this segment is pointing out the racism of the left, which is the same racism and built on the same philosophy upon which the Buffalo shooter built his manifesto. Again, we went over it on the show last week, not on Facebook, because Facebook has an editorial policy and so does YouTube. But if I'm going to get the boot, I'm only going to get the boot on one location. It might as well be YouTube. So if you guys want to check that out, it's the second half of last week's show on YouTube. You can go to my channel and just look at the show. We read the thing on air. Everything he was espousing, yes, was white nationalism, and it was a white nationalism from the perspective of the left wing. But that wasn't, again, this is a retweet. I realize that. I realize that's a retweet. But again, it's building towards the spirit of the thing. And it isn't the most insane retweet that they had. This is from Liz Cheney, who wonders why she's getting primaried. The House GOP leadership has enabled white nationalism, white supremacy, and anti-Semitism. History has taught us that what begins with words ends in far worse. Yes, the history of 1984. GOP leaders must renounce and reject these views and those who hold them. They universally have. They universally have. What an excellent use of gaslight, Liz. And to the DTC that's retweeting this, tell me why you're retweeting this. Because, it's speaking towards the spirit of the thing. And for those watching who follow along, who weren't on Mars last year and follow along at all with the DTC's leadership's campaign material, and I don't mean just one flyer. Again, we beat this horse to death. We beat this horse to death in this show. Does any of this sound familiar? All GOP. The GOP leadership has enabled white nationalism, white supremacism. Here we go. Not only is this a disgusting gaslight, what happens when you see that when it really comes to light, which we're going to talk about later on the show. We're definitely going to be bringing that up. The point is, does any of this sound familiar? And we're going to continue on this retweet trend. And we're going to get into the tweets that the DTC has actually put out. This is from Connecticut Dems. This is their candidate, Chris Murphy. This is their candidate. This is their guy. There are not good people on both sides of the fight against white supremacist violence. Here you go, folks. Senator Chris Murphy on the right-wing normalization of racism and its deadly convergence with America's acceptance of gun violence. Okay, there's a concept called stochastic terrorism, which is bullshit. But if it isn't bullshit, this is it. The left wing is the one saying that there is such a thing as stochastic terrorism. This is it. What is the rational and reasonable response to this? If it is all GOP white nationalist racists that are out to kill people, what is the reasonable response to there is actually a Hitler in office and he's actually rounding up the Jews and he's actually murdering them by the thousands each day? What is the reasonable response to that? The reasonable response to that is to start killing Nazis. Just en masse. Do you have the armband? Shoot him dead. That's the reasonable response to Germany 1943. That's the reasonable response of Polish citizens in 1943. That's the reasonable response. I don't know how you derive, like when, and I say when because it's going to happen, but when people from the left wing start arming themselves and start shooting up people in the right wing because they're right wing, is Chris Murphy going to own this? Is the DTC going to say, ooh, you know what, we kind of disavow what Chris Murphy was saying? No, you're not going to see it happen. But that's the reasonable response to this. This is the reasonable response to this. And this is at its core why the campaign from last year with the New Milford DTC was just not necessarily illegal, but in the colloquial sense, criminal. This is why they lost 73-27. This right here. But of course, again, the insanity, this is just from Buffalo. All of this should sound familiar, and it's just from Buffalo. We're going to start with the Uvalde response. This is going to start the Uvalde response. And this is actually from New Milford Dems. And this isn't just a retweet. And like I said, folks, the more we go down the line, the more insane it gets. We need action. So this is a prescription for reactionary politics. My God, America, 15 people dead inside an American elementary school. Are you prescribing something here, Democrats? Or are you saying, just do anything? We need action. This is a prescription for reactionary politics, which I told you lead to the worst policy. This is a retweet from William Tong, who I have no idea how Democrats actually nominated this guy, unless they're willing to admit that they're just racists. They're just insane radicals at this point. This guy, if there was a guy that I could campaign against to make sure his opponent wins, it's William Tong. And this is what the New Milford DTC is retweeting. What more to say that hasn't been said so many times? Words do little for families in Texas, living every parent's worst nightmare. Our babies aren't safe in school. So we should make sure then there are people there to make them safe. Hello. And it was Senator Chris Murphy, as we talked about last week, that was proposing legislation to get rid of these school security officers. Our grandparents aren't safe in grocery stores or churches. Again, we went through the data. This is just false. Those ready to act, thank you. Those who refuse, shame. We know what this is in response to. We know what this is alluding to, because we have the next thing that they retweeted. John Craven, happening now. Chris Murphy says Democrats will force a vote on a gun control package in the coming weeks, even if there aren't enough votes. Quote, make no mistake, we will have a debate in the United States Senate. We will take a vote, end quote. This is a prescription for reactionary politics. I told you, aside from the fact that this isn't true, aside from the fact that these shootings are extremely rare, and that in New Milford, your kids are fine. In Connecticut public schools, outside of possibly New Haven, Hartford, and Bridgeport, your kids are fine. Aside from the fact that they're getting all the facts wrong, yes, all of these things, all of the things that you guys, we demand action, but all of the things that would actually work, you guys oppose. Mandatory institutionalization, you guys oppose it. You oppose remanding people, as long as they're a person of color, as long as it's politically convenient. You oppose stiff sentences for anything, let alone recidivism or violent crime. Of course, again, unless it fits the narrative. You guys are the guys that oppose the hardening of soft targets. Again, we went over it last week. Chris Murphy still has on his campaign page, on his personal campaign page, that he's proud of the fact that he was trying to get rid of these armed school security officers. It's you guys that oppose, as you're displaying right now, taking a breath and reject the idea that reactionary politics is bad politics. It's you guys that are proposing, that are espousing the idea of rejection of taking a breath. That you guys want the reactionary politics. It's you guys that oppose the mere existence of the Second Amendment, which we described last week. There's way, way more uses of firearms in defensive actions than in criminal activity. And there's a good rationale to believe that here in the United States, guns save way more lives than they actually kill. And by the way, what winds up stopping these school shooters in every single case, with extraordinarily rare exceptions, when they're actually stopped, when they're actually apprehended, when they're actually caught, what's doing it? What's actually doing it? Go back to Columbine. Those two guys committed suicide by gun. We can go to the Buffalo shooter who was apprehended by guys with guns. We can go to the guys with guns may be police officers. It may be them shooting themselves in the head. It may be that they get handcuffed. Why were they willing to surrender? It's because they know the police officers have guns. In every single case, in the end of it, the shooters in mass shootings and in school shootings are stopped with, in the end of it, a gun. It's you guys that oppose allowing schools to subjectively make punishment decisions on a case-by-case basis. Things like making damn sure that our kids who are as nut job as the Buffalo shooter get expelled. Like the Uvalde shooter, get expelled without condition. To be able to just say, no, this guy's out of school. And if you see him on property, he's arrested, period. If you see him in the parking lot, in the football field, walking around the building, off he goes in handcuffs before he even gets into the school. You guys, it's the DTC and their ilk that oppose this sort of work, these sort of things. And again, I saw the social emotional learning presentations in 2020 that you guys are bringing towards us, that are coming from the left wing, that reject the allowance of schools to subjectively make punishment decisions on a case-by-case basis, that want objective criteria and don't want to be able to have schools say to anyone. We talked about the reactionary politics. We talked about all of the insanity that's coming from the proverbial opposition in this case, but the king of them all is a retweet, again, that originated from Connecticut CT against gun violence. Need a primer on how to respond to NRA talking points? This is it. From State Representative Christine Palm, 36. We can click on that and we can go through and read this thing. Excuse me while I reshape the window so you guys can see this better. All right, let's get that to there. Let's get that over there. Let's move this over here. Get everything centralized. Here, now you guys should be able to read this article. Let's dismiss those pro-gun talking points. They don't have to be pro-gun. They could be pro-defense. You get to exist and defend yourself. By the way, I'm going to go ahead and drop this link. In the comment section. Yeah, I know we're going over. I don't care. It needs to be done. Here's a link to this article so you guys can follow along from home. And by the way, this article is truly insane. And it starts with just the headline of the article, of course. A prescription to dismiss those quote-unquote pro-gun talking points rather than to debunk them. Right? You would think the appropriate response would be to debunk these talking points rather than to dismiss them. This is what they're actually recommending. After every mass shooting, predictable tropes and platitudes are trotted out like tired old show ponies. And are you tired of hearing our thoughts and prayers are with the families? Where would they be? Where would they otherwise be? Ours has become a nation of empty thoughts and insincere prayers. Screw you. Just screw you. This is your way of just saying, like, these people are praying for these kids. So you don't want them to pray for this kid? You want them to pray for the shooters? Screw you. Just screw you. We're not even going to read this. It's not about guns. It's about mental health. Yes, and we went through the data last week. It's not about the guns. Here, let's zoom in so you guys can see this better. So I guess the citizens of every other country in the world have no mental health issues. Gaslight, because it's not no, it's significantly less. And yes, they do. They don't have West Baltimore. They don't have Southside Chicago. They don't have East St. Louis. They don't have the war zones I lived in Savannah, Georgia. They don't have that. Not in the developed world. Though, again, so I guess the citizens of every other country, which would include places like Somalia, whose capital is Mogadishu, it would include places like Eritrea, would include places like Afghanistan, would include places like Suriname, would include places like the entire third world that makes up a huge percentage of the world. So if we're going to compare ourselves to the rest of the world, if we're going to compare ourselves to, quote, every other country, end quote, the answer is yes, obviously they have serious mental issues in these other countries. There was a shooting that happened today in Nigeria that's finally making news. Only in the United States has mental health become the excuse for mass murder because these guys are insane. Because these guys have serious mental health issues. And it's painfully obvious. We read their manifesto. Are you trying to tell us that these people are rational thinkers? That the rationales that they're providing for shooting up these schools are things that folks should somehow agree with? Please reject this NRA talking point for the smokescreen that it is, because it's true. Please engage in 1984. And if it really were as simple as getting ill people more services, as in institutionalizing them, why do the same politicians who refuse to regulate guns also tend to refuse to pay for mental health programs and social service safety nets? Bullshit. I'll say it, bullshit. We're the ones that are willing to have government run the mental institutions. We are willing to take out of our taxes, go ahead, put up Arkham Asylum. It's you guys that oppose that. It's you guys that oppose that. We're the ones that are saying if it costs a ton of money to have a guy, instead of being sentenced to 3 to 5, to be sentenced to 35, we're the ones that are in favor of that. You're the ones who are opposed to that. What an unbelievable gaslight. What a disgusting gaslight. Just because we don't want to pay for, and by the way, when they say mental health programs, they mean handouts. They mean give these people money. Guess what happens when degenerates have money? Do they become no longer degenerates, or do they become degenerates which have money? Right? Like, one of the serious questions that our proverbial side is asking is, how did the kid in Uvalde manage to get those guns and ammo in the first place from the sheer economics of the thing? Like, this cost thousands and thousands and thousands. Where did he get this money from? How in the world did he get this money? He was a degenerate who somehow came across money. And guess what? He shot up the school because he was a degenerate and came across the money. Degenerate's gonna degenerate. Surprise of the year. If you give a degenerate money, all he becomes is a degenerate with money. Newsflash. But I'm a responsible gun owner. Yeah? Where the hell are you then? Behind the police line! Why, after every single mass shooting, is there total abject and cowardly silence from the so-called quote-unquote responsible gun owners? But again, what a disgusting gaslight. Because you know what we're saying? We're saying that if we were allowed to carry and we were already there in the first place, like a teacher who would be already there in the first place and who could be allowed to be there, like the janitors, like the secretaries, like all of the adult human beings in that building who could be packing heat, who are already there. You really, this is what this is saying is that the adults in the room who are watching this, you guys at home, they're telling you guys at home that you wouldn't have the guts to take your gun to the school and shoot this guy up. Bullshit. Again, this is a disgusting smear and the exact opposite of what responsible gun owners are saying. Why are you not as outraged as those of us who do not own guns? Again, what this is saying is you're a Republican and you like guns, therefore you like school shootings. Screw you. Like, a giant screw you. What an evil piece of shit this guy is. And this is what the DTC is in agreement with, from what we can tell. He was a lone wolf who acted alone. Because there was one of them. Because he was one. Hello. Because there was one guy who went to the school and shot it up. No, actually he didn't. Then who's the other person? Name them. Name them, you evil piece of shit. He acted with the full and complete complicity of the cowards in the U.S. Senate who refused to bring up for a vote House Resolution 8, which wouldn't have done a goddamn thing to stop this. This bill passed by the House in 2021 on a bipartisan basis. No, it didn't. No, it didn't. I saw the vote count. You got like 8 Republicans to vote in favor of it. Would simply close loopholes in current background checks. Bullshit. That's not what it would have done. We're gonna have to go over House Resolution 8 in 2021 because that's just a disgusting smear of what it was going to do. But it languages in U.S. Senate Mitch McConnell's inbox while kids continue to die. Fuck you. Like, this is what the DTC is sharing. This is what they're in agreement with. This is an isolated incident, a tragedy. We went over the data. It is a tragedy. Are you telling me it's not a tragedy? Are you telling me you're in favor of this sort of thing? This is an isolated incident. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. These things are incredibly rare. And the type of shooting we saw in Uvalde is not what the normal school shooting looks like. For everyone to think, oh, there's 288 shootings a year or something like that. Yeah, like 278 of them are in ghettos. And we went over what those were like. We went over the raw data. It's gang violence. It's gang violence that you guys don't want to do anything about. That the measures that could be in place to get rid of these gangs that have worked in the past and continue to work in the rare places where they're ongoing, it's you guys that oppose them. None of these incidents is isolated. They're a daily part of American life, and they are not tragedies. So Democrats like death. Democrats like I wish I could just copy and paste this. I wish I could copy. DTC leadership, if you're watching this video, tell me why murdering kids is good. They are not tragedies. Tell me why they're not tragedies. Tell me why you like dead kids. A tragedy is something that cannot be prevented, like a hurricane or a flood. What a disgusting. Here we go. Double think. We're just using the 1984 playbook to redefine a word. Suppose 19 kids in the same elementary school in your town suddenly and inexplicably died of the same kind of cancer. That would be a tragedy. How could those kids have gotten that cancer in the first place? Would that get your attention? Again, fuck you. At this point, no longer is this a screw you. This guy is one of the most evil people on earth if he's espousing this nonsense. We never thought it would happen here because the data says so. I never thought I would win the Powerball jackpot because the odds are catastrophically against it. Why not? Why not here? Because the data said so. Because this is reality. And it will continue to happen here and here and here. And in all the little backwater, hard to pronounce, commonplace, poor, rich, barren, leafy, thriving, declining, tiny, huge, uniquely American here, stretching from Sandy Hook to Sacramento. Again, if this is true, then tell me why it's a good investment to invest in the Powerball. Tell me why that's a smart investment. Otherwise, this is just evil. This is just a conducting of evil. It will happen in your workplace, my school, our church, until we stop assuming it will only hit somewhere far away, somewhere we've never heard of, somewhere whose children have less value than our own. I'm pro-life and pro-gun. Oh my God, here this goes. If you are glad Roe v. Wade is about to get overturned because you believe abortion is murder, I'm not even reading it. I know this is going to be a gaslight. What do you call it when that embryo eventually becomes a child, hopping down the steps of a school bus, lunch pail in tow, who enters a school, sits immediately in a chair and is shot dead when a madman bursts in the room? Not murder? No. Again, one is murder, the other one is murder. This is not the Republican talking point. This is not the right-wing talking point. This is not the libertarian talking point. This is not the people that are in the middle. This is not the Democrats who are like, you know what, guns really aren't the problem here. This isn't the Democrats like Destiny who say, well, the data says the gun isn't the problem. Again, what they're trying to tell folks is that the folks that aren't in that wildly, ridiculously left-wing, tiny, pathetically narrow Overton window, that they believe that kids getting shot in school is not murder. This is the same people that said these things aren't tragedies. Again, a big fuck you. And this is what the DTC is sharing. Not the taking of human life, not a sin against the eyes of God, not against your religious beliefs the way abortion is just an unfortunate byproduct of your freedom. No, it's a byproduct of insanity. It's a byproduct of evil, and is therefore evil. And you know this. You know it. The Second Amendment is my constitutional right, and you're coming for my guns. No, we're not. Yes, you are. Bullshit. I'm not even going to read the rest of this. But there's nothing I can do. Yes, there are things you can do, and we went over those things, and you oppose them. This is the DTC, folks. This is your DTC here in New Milford. And like we started off with the show, the response to all of this is, again, just election in November, election in November, election in November. The Second Amendment is a protection against the right to defend yourself. The Second Amendment, let's say it again, the Second Amendment is a protection of the right to defend yourself and your mere existence. Sometimes that's going to require using a gun. Sometimes that's going to require keeping and bearing arms. And one day that might require a phaser as the technology permits. That's the Second Amendment in a nutshell. And none of these laws work. None of these things that the DTC is in favor of and that the proverbial other side is espousing, is prescribing, ever works. And the other response I have to all of this not working is the response that I shared on Twitter that you guys should follow me on. He would have just bought the gun illegally. He would have just gotten the gun illegally. If you're going to make it illegal, then the person who's going to do the illegal thing is going to do the illegal thing. So if you guys want more spicy memes, link is in this video's description. Follow me on Twitter. Follow me on Gab. Follow me on Getter. Follow me on all these social media where you're going to get useful information, where you're going to get memes that aren't completely insane, where you're going to get tweets of things that aren't just a giant fuck you to the voting electorate here in New Milford. And excuse the foul language, but what's the appropriate response? I don't like using foul language on this show, but what else am I left to do? These people are criminals. These people have, what's happening isn't happening outside of themselves. It's happening between their ears. If they're not going, and the crazy part is, if they're not going to use guns, if these nut jobs aren't going to use guns, they're going to use what the rest of the world uses. Bombs. We're going to see Oklahoma City instead. Instead of, 4, 5, 6, which is the majority of these mass shootings, 4, 5, or 6 people dead, we're going to see Oklahoma City, where hundreds of people were killed. Hundreds of lives of the innocents were killed. Where hundreds of kids were killed. And if we get rid of the guns, that's what we're going to see instead. And quite frankly, if I have a gun to my head and have to pick one or the other, obviously I'm picking 4 kids dead, not 150 kids dead. And the final response, as we said, again, election in November, election in November, election in November. There is a party that does not believe in rights, that does not believe in that concept of rights that just pre-exist government. They don't believe in rights. And it is, of course, straight out of 1984, the party. Capital T, capital P, the party. And I say this because they're full on championing the fact that they're no longer treating 1984 as a warning against the dystopian future, but instead they're treating it like their straight up instruction manual to a T. There's a reason they always make the rule out of the extremely rare exception, the fringe case. And there's a reason the way you predict their next move is to find the slippery slope. Start with the fringe case and take it to its insane logical end, which we just read. This is why they had to invent the slippery slope fallacy. It's not a fallacy. And it's because they're straight out of 1984 engaging in doublespeak, gaslighting you into believing that slippery slopes don't exist. We know what all this is going towards. And people are going to say, well, Mike, what am I supposed to do about this? Again, the best response I can say to this point is election in November, election in November, election in November. So let's go over who the candidates are at the very least. Let me get rid of this. Let's go over who the candidates are. And we're going to start at the top and work our way down. Connecticut's 5th district, which I'm in, which encompasses all of New Milford among a host of other places. Let me bring this up so I can follow along myself. Is going to be George Logan taking on incumbent Jahana Hayes. George Logan is the Republican running against Jahana Hayes, who is the incumbent Democrat. This is George Logan's page. If you guys want links to these pages, I'll share them. But quite frankly, there's just kind of a lot of links to drop in here, and we're going to go over it pretty quick. So just let me know if you want me to share them. George Logan is taking on multi-time incumbent Jahana Hayes, who has voted again in favor of every gun control measure that has come to the floor of the House. She has been the one who has espoused the ideas of get rid of guns, get rid of violence, which is against what the data shows. George Logan isn't, and Jahana Hayes can't get away with identity politics anymore because of who's running against her in George Logan, which is something that she largely campaigned on previously. She's been very quiet because her actual politics, if you follow her voting record, are not exactly moderate. Now, the other thing to point out is that she's in the 5th district, which we can go over real quick. Let's just show you what the results have been over the past few years. This is 2018, 55 to 44. This is 2020, 55 to 43. She has the power of incumbency and the power of a 5th district that has been gerrymandered to absolute death. And I can show you what that means. Let's see. Here we go. Oh, no, we don't have it. Oh, no. Sorry. So these are the margins she's winning by. These are not huge margins in Connecticut, which is widely considered, a Democrat stronghold state. These are winnable margins. Now, the way you go about winning this, of course, is number one, redistricting, which didn't happen because the district is like nakedly gerrymandered, nakedly gerrymandered. Let me see if we can pull up the actual district here, so you can see what the shape of the thing currently looks like. Excuse me while I bring this up. We should have a map here. Yeah, this is Ballotopedia. They do a pretty good job of just agglomerating data. This is what the 5th district looks like. And you can see on the right side, Meriden. Why is Meriden in our district? Look how far out they have to reach to get to Meriden. Why is New Britain in our district? Who thinks of New Britain as being part of the northwest corner of Connecticut? Do you think of it as more as being with Hartford? Meriden. Is that part of the northwest corner of New Milford? Of Connecticut? Is that part of the ethos and spirit of New Milford, Warren, Cornwall, Sharon, Torrington? Or is it something you'd associate more with like Middletown, New Haven, Hartford? Well, we all know what the reason these cities are included, because they're giant cities that are Democrat guarantees. We don't even have all of Torrington. We've talked about this before in the show, but Torrington's split in half. Do we have the Naugatuck Valley? No. We have Southbury. We have all the Burries, but we don't have all of Waterbury. We don't have Naugatuck. We don't have Ansonia. These are Republican strongholds. This is the most based and red-pilled part of Connecticut. We don't have any of the towns north of Torrington, which are all red. Yeah, they're small, but they're all red. Right? The district does not respect the spirit and the ethos of the northwest corner of Connecticut at all. Like when you think of New Milford, do you also think of Southbury? Kind of. Do you also think of Naugatuck, Watertown? Kind of, maybe. Do you also think of Torrington? Kind of, maybe. Salisbury? Kind of, maybe. Do you think of New Britain? No. Just no. Like, these districts should not, I don't care about the shape of the thing necessarily. It doesn't necessarily need to be rectangles. We've talked about this. But if we're going to talk about gerrymandering, it's obviously happening here in Connecticut. It's obviously happening here in the 5th district with Jonna Hayes. I'm going to call it her district because she's the incumbent. And we've talked about on the show, what my recommendation would be to go ahead and get this thing fixed. There it is, folks. There's your 5th district. I know people are going to look at it and say, well, it's closer to a rectangle. Cool. No, I don't care about that. What I care about is we've no longer gone to extraordinary lengths to get ourselves over to Meriden, Southington, and New Britain. And we have included things like the Naugatuck River area. And not only have we created something that's a little bit closer to a rectangle, which is what most people are asking for when it comes to gerrymandering, we've created a district that culturally, in the spirit of the thing, better reflects the spirit of the thing. We've drawn a district where there's no lines dividing a town in half. And what you wind up doing when you draw the district like this is you don't actually change at nat. You don't really change at nat the number of electors in each of these districts. So you're not changing the number of people. You're just changing the people. And if the map were drawn like this, then Jonna Hayes would still have won in 2020, let's say. But the margins, as we've talked about on the show, and we've actually shown the math behind, and we pull out the Excel spreadsheet, would have been more like 3 or 4 points. 3 or 4 points is the generic incumbency advantage. So if George Logan wants to get his act together and run a campaign, because quite frankly, David X. Sullivan ran a borderline non-campaign in 2020. If George Logan gets his act together, if we start to see him, if he runs a campaign the way Larry Sharp runs a campaign, where he's got an in-person, 2 or 3 in-person meetings a day, where he's on YouTube and Facebook constantly, where he's this thing that predicts elections better than anything really is name recognition, especially in a district like Connecticut's 5th, which could be flippable. Now, George Logan has to know he's not going to get New Britain. He's not going to get Meriden. He's not going to get South. He's not going to get that northeast corner. There are places he's just not going to get. He could get New Milford, which is a flip town. He could get New Milford's Democrat voters to vote for him instead of Jonna Hayes. He could do that. And by the way, as we go over all of these candidates, and this is an open invitation to any candidate running for elected office in 2022 to come on to the show, so long as there's at least some sort of tie to New Milford. If you're a personal friend of mine and you want to talk about it, then let's do it. Let's do it. And we're going to have somebody on our show next week. We'll get into that in just a moment. So Jonna Hayes, George Logan, this is an invitation for you to come on to the show, either together We can do a little bit of a debate, which I think would be really cool. And you guys could reach folks in New Milford, a swing town, a swing part of the district, or individually. And we can do what we did last year in 2021. And we can have our good faith interviews. We had a Democrat come on in 2021. And I feel like I treated her fairly. You guys didn't. And that's okay. Like, I know what my audience is like. Right? And I'll say the name, Joe D. You didn't treat her fairly, but I did. And, you know, if Johanna, if you're thinking about coming on my show, I know you're probably not going to get this message, but you'd be a guest on my show. Therefore, I would treat you like a guest on my show and not like what Bill O'Reilly used to do with his guests, right? This isn't a gotcha podcast. This isn't an inform the public podcast. And yes, there's going to be some opinion injected into it. And, you know, if you follow the show, you know what that opinion is going to look like in general. So George, Johanna, love to have you guys on the show, either separately and we can do interviews, or together and we can do a little bit of a moderated debate, which would be awesome. I'd love the latter. I love both. So formal invitation to you guys to come on to the show. As far as what's happening here in Connecticut, as far as the people we'd be sending to Hartford, let me start. The place to find this, and I'll put this link in the comment section here so you guys can follow along. The place to find the people that have filed, at least, and who are ostensibly going to be running in 2022 is the following link here. It's with the SEEC. No sound. How are we not getting any sound? Okay. Here's that link so you guys can follow along. Rebecca Billard, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. George Logan is a great candidate. And she also says, dividing towns in half is expensive to the town and confusing for residents. Damn right. Damn right. There's a million reasons not to divide a town. There's one good reason to divide a town, and that's because when you get a place like Torrington that's pretty doggone red, you don't want those reds to have to compete with the New Britain and Meriden blues. So what's happening here in Connecticut? I just shared a link so you guys can get onto the SEEC site and you can see the candidates for here in that would be representing at least part of New Milford. And where we're going to start, because we said we're going to start at the top, work our way down. Yes, Demis Gloritis is running against, I believe it's for Connecticut's second Senate seat, which would be Chris Murphy's seat. And we've covered Chris Murphy today. So Themis probably deserves her own show before we go into any of it, because we're just going to gloss over the candidates. But in the Connecticut Senate, so the Senate in Hartford, the 30th district is the district that represents New Milford. And in the 30th district, we're going to be getting, and this is what if you follow that link. Oh, here we go. There we go. This is what that looks like. It's going to be Steve Harding versus Ava Zimmerman. Steve being the Republican. Steve has been gracious enough to agree to come on to the show next week. So next week at 7:30, we're not going to have a regular episode of the Mike Sennello Show. We're going to have Steve Harding on, and we're going to have a nice conversation about his campaign, about himself and his campaign, and what folks can expect from him in the 30th district. Craig Minor has decided not to continue running and is going to effectively retire from holding political office in Hartford. So Steve Harding is looking to take his seat. I believe Steve Harding. Let me get up my notes. Steve is coming on the show next week at 7:30. So put your calendars down. Steve was nice enough to meet me at the Goat Days. And I'll get into this in more detail in just a moment here. But Billy Mo Buckby, who's running in the 67th, who is the incumbent in the 67th and represents where I live. Billy Mo Buckby was nice enough to introduce Steve to me and me to Steve. Steve is the incumbent in the 107th district and the House. That's Brookfield, Bethel, Newtown, Danbury. It doesn't cover the whole of those towns, but the 107th district covers basically that area just south of New Milford. So he's, I was assuming, giving up his 107th seat to run for what was Craig Minor's seat in the Senate and the 30th. I'll bring up his page so you guys can see that. That's his page, and we can come see his upcoming events. It doesn't have much on here, but that's how you guys can get to Steve Harding. Link is at the top of your... Oops. Oops. Link is at the top of your screen. This is Steve Harding's page. Not much there. His opponent is Ava Zimmerman, and this is her page. And there's a little bit more on Ava. We're not going to go into great detail in the matter, but she has on here, she's kind of like campaigning on the result of Sheff versus O'Neill, which I encourage folks to look into. Did I actually bring this up? Oh, here we go. Let's bring this up. Sheff versus O'Neill refers to a 1989 lawsuit and subsequent 1996 Supreme Court case. And we actually have the scholarly article from I think this is University of, Massachusetts. Here we go. Abstract. On April 18th, 1989, 18 school-aged children from the metropolitan Hartford, Connecticut area, acting through the parents, commenced a civil action in Hartford Supreme Court. The plaintiffs alleged significant constitutional violations under applicable sections of the state constitution, which they believe constituted a denial of their fundamental rights to an education and rights to an equal protection under the law. In the landmark civil rights decision of Sheff versus O'Neill, the Connecticut Supreme Court on July 16, 1996, ruled that based upon these constitutional claims, the state had an affirmative obligation to provide Connecticut children with a substantially equal educational opportunity. The constitutionally guaranteed right encompasses access to a public education which is not substantially immaterial impaired by racial and ethnic isolation. The court further concluded that school districting based on town and city boundary lines are unconstitutional. Great. The implications and potential ramifications of this decision are significant. The dissertation chronicles the events and examinations issues surrounding the decision. So we can actually go back to Wikipedia and get some more of this. The decision was appealed to the Connecticut. So let's go back to 1995. The initial decision, Judge Harry Hammer ruled in favor of the state in the case, so against what would wind up being the Connecticut State Supreme Court decision, which is being championed by Zimmerman. His decision rejected claims that officials are obligated to correct educational inequities, no matter how they came to be. Further, he ruled that without proof that government action helped foster racial isolation, courts cannot require steps that would change the composition of the city and suburban school enrollments. Well, that just seems like common sense. Without proof that government action helped foster racial isolation, so without proof of racism, courts cannot require steps that would change the racial makeup. So now you can change the racial makeup without evidence that there's been racism. This decision was appealed to the Supreme Court. The court overruled Hammer's ruling in a split 4-3 decision over Chief Justice Ellen Ash Peters. Peters was joined in the majority opinion by Justice Robert Burden, Fleming R. Norcott, and Joetta Katz. Justice David Borden authored the dissent, with Justices Robert Callahan and Richard Palmer concurring with the dissent. The court ruled that the state had an affirmative obligation to provide Connecticut school children with a substantially equal educational opportunity, and that this constitutionally guaranteed right encompasses the access to a public education which is not substantially materially impaired by racial and ethnic isolation. The court further concluded that school districting, based upon town lines, is unconstitutional, and cited a statute that bound school districts by town lines as a key factor in the high concentration of racial and ethnic minorities in Hartford. As a result of the decision, in 1997, the Connecticut State Legislature passed legislation entitled, which doesn't matter, which encourages voluntary actions toward racial integration. The act also included a number of other measures related to magnet and regional schools and the requirement of Connecticut State Department of Education to come up with a 5-year plan to assess and eliminate inequalities between school districts. So I've actually read more into this, and I encourage you guys to do the same, because this isn't all that hunky-dory. The decision winds up being overtly racist. It redefines opportunity to mean outcome. And basically what the ruling was saying here is that there should be value judgments assessed and attributed to individuals based on the racial makeup of those individuals. And that because of that, you should allow for schools to handpick who they're going to allow into their district by race. They're going to say that if you don't have enough minorities in your school, you can bus in more minorities. But only if it's because you don't have enough minorities in your school, which means you can't bus in more white people into Bridgeport, but you can bus in more minorities into Ridgefield because they're minorities, because it's better to do this sort of thing because they're minorities. Do you see how we're attributing value to somebody based on race? And that is the decision. And again, the decision goes on to assert that equity is the same, that opportunity means outcome. It means the same thing. This is just 1984 playbook redistricted. So I don't mean to poison the well, but I wouldn't hang my hat on a decision like this, which seems to me to be exactly the opposite of what Martin Luther King Jr. would prescribe. Now, that's what's happening at the 30th Senate District. In the 67th District, as you can see, let's bring it up. Where are you? There it is. In the 67th District, which is most of New Milford, and only in New Milford, we'll have Billy Buckby. Let's zoom in on this just one more time. Can we? Can we zoom in on this one more time? No, we can't. Okay. Billy Mo Buckby, who is the incumbent, and from what I understand, this is all the paperwork is basically done. There's just waiting for some clerical stuff to get taken care of. But it's, for all intents and purposes, all buttoned up. It's going to be Billy Buckby running against Alexandra Thomas. Here in New Milford, you'll notice that as a Democrat, she's a Democrat. She's non-participating and active exempt, which means that this could be a placeholder. This could just be a placeholder until they nominate somebody else. But as far as we can tell, that seems to be right now, in the moment, the opposition. And since the Democrats haven't had the opportunity to release that information themselves, you're hearing that as breaking news here on the Mike Sennello Show. You're hearing it here first, before you hear it from anyone else. It's going to be Billy Mo Buckby versus, ostensibly, Alexandra Thomas. Let me bring up Buckby's page so you guys can see that. Here we go. Here's Buckby's page. This is off of the Connecticut House GOP page. It doesn't really get updated all that often. So, quite frankly, the better option for folks, if you want to stay informed on Billy, is to follow him on Facebook, where he is, as far as the state reps are concerned, he's way, way, way more active on Facebook than really anyone else. You can see May 18th, 2021, he has a video released of himself in office. Seems to be at least semi-professionally done. He's got a post here on June 2nd, which is more recent even than that. He does respond to people who comment. So honestly, this is the guy who took the advice, it seems, to be proactive with engaging with the community. I told you folks that the thing that's going to predict elections more often than anything is name recognition. That's a huge part of why there is the power of the incumbency. And speaking of that, in a district which is definitely not majority Republican, in a district that is purple, it's full on purple, I would say. It's not even pink anymore. It's full on purple. This is what it looked like in the 67th House last time around, where Hillary Ram got kind of lost by a lot. That's almost 20 points. In a district like this, that's a spanking. Billy Mo Buckby is incredibly popular. Billy, since we're going to have the guy you Steve Harding, the guy you referred to me, Billy, open invitation to come on to the show. So folks know Billy and I have been talking. He's going to try to get on the show. Hopefully pretty soon. We may even have him join us with Harding, so we can do like a 2-for-1 deal. So you guys get a chance to meet two of your candidates in one shot. We'll see how that goes. Again, open invitation to everybody to come on. Open invitation to Alex to come on. If you're going to be the actual candidate, Alexandra Thomas, again, if you want to come on the show, happy to have you on. Happy to conduct the interview like we did with all the Democrats that we've had on the show in the past. We had one last year. We've had some in years prior. Don't think that's going to be the case, but honest, open invitation for you to come on to the show. And would love to do interviews with any candidate. So that's what's happening in the 67th District. Let me pull up my notes because we have a few more districts here in New Milford because of redesigning of the districting. New Milford is now going to include a tiny, tiny, tiny sliver of the 69th District. And that's because of the 2020, they're effective in 2022. So this is what the old 69th District looks like. And this is on the right, this is what it looks like today. So we can actually zoom in a little bit. We can go over here and you can see before the boundary of the 69th District was New Milford, and now it includes parts of southeastern New Milford. So that would be the 69th District. In the 69th District, we are going to get Jason Bucksbaum versus Cindy Harrison. Jason was kind enough to come to the RTC, to an RTC meeting a few months ago. It's where I got a chance to meet him. So I'll be sending out the invitation for him to come out, come onto the show soon. You'll notice here that in the 69th district, there are no Democrats running. It doesn't, which means that at this point, I believe it's too late for the Democrats to get anybody onto this list. I believe, I could be wrong. I can't remember if it's July 1st or if it's June 1st. I'm pretty sure it's June 1st to get onto this listing, which doesn't mean they can't technically run a candidate, but this has been a pretty historically red district. So my guess is they're just simply not running a candidate in the 69th district. So there are people here in New Milford that this would qualify for. What there is going to be a, it's going to be a runoff between two Republican candidates, which would be a primary. That primary is going to be held in August. I think it's August 6th. Don't hold me to that. I tried looking that up beforehand. So folks know Cindy Harrison is the incumbent who is, from what I understand, forcing a primary, as far as I can tell, against Bucksbaum. This is Jason's page, so you guys can check that out. Again, link is at the top of the screen, jason4ct.com. This is the closest I can come to Cindy Harrison's page. Like Buckby, she apparently is just listed on the House GOP page, where they do have an About section, so you guys can read that on your free time if you feel like it. Again, it seems like it's Harrison who is the incumbent and forcing the primary. Seems to be tough for me to get a bead onto what exactly is going on there. Again, tonight we're just going over who's running, basics for who's running. The 108th district does cover northwestern New Milford and into Gaylordsville. Pat Callahan is the incumbent. And let's bring up his page so you guys can see that. That's Pat Callahan's page. He is running against, again, let me pull up my notes. He is running against, I don't know who. Because if we go to that list, you'll see that there isn't anybody running against him. So this isn't a really red district like the Connecticut 69th historically. Oh, yeah. Bucksbaum is the incumbent in the 107th. Excuse me. Yeah, so Bucksbaum, who was the 107th? No, I'm sorry. Steve Harding is the incumbent in the 107th. He's moving over to the Senate, looking to take Craig Minor's seat in the 30th, as Craig Minor is retiring. So that's Callahan's page, callahan4rep.com. Right now, there isn't anybody there for the Democrats. I'm assuming they might be putting in a placeholder. It doesn't mean that there isn't going to be an opponent, but it does mean that they're going to have to go to pretty extraordinary lengths at this point to get a placeholder. So that's who's running. I don't like to say just vote red no matter who, but you've seen what's coming out of the ranks of Democrats when it comes to the response to the last few weeks. Election in November, election in November, election in November. And since we've gone way over, let's go ahead and get into your commentary. I'll go over to YouTube first, seeing no commentary there. YouTube's being a pain in the butt right now for some reason. Okay, so what do we have here? Leslie. Police have been in our schools since 2015. Well, they've actually been in there. They were actually there when I was in high school. They weren't rent-a-cops. They were proper actual police. So they may even have been there prior to 2015. There may have been like an on-again, off-again situation prior to 2015. I don't know. But they've been in there for a long time. So what New Milford is doing in terms of getting these armed school security officers into the schools is actually not reactionary politics. It's actually preparing for these situations regardless of whether or not something necessarily happens. We are backfilling Northfield at Sheridan officer. That's correct. So again, all of the schools are going to have at least one full-time officer. There may be multiple officers in these schools. Again, I don't want to reveal any more. I don't want to reveal anything more than that because potential shooters, all I want them to know is that there is going to be somebody with guns and there may be multiple people with guns and that you're rolling the dice by going into these schools. Three people who, this is from Leslie again, the three people who spoke Thursday against police with guns were grossly misinformed. Yes, they are. They are. Because in the end, it's always going to be a good guy with a gun that stops them. In the end, it's always going to be at least a gun and lead that stops these people. Rebecca or Billard, what did it cost to set this off and reset it for TV? I don't know what you're asking there, Rebecca. So please clarify what you're saying in that comment. George Logan is a great candidate. Dividing towns in half is expensive to the town and confusing for residents. Oh, so is that what you're referring to? I don't know what you're referring to earlier. Themis still has to primary. This is from Rebecca. I guess that's true. I guess there is somebody that is running against her in terms of the primary. I know that there was a primary candidacy, but I thought the primary already happened. Perhaps it's being extended into the August 6th deadline. Rebecca, what are your thoughts on Republican Senate primary and Republican Secretary of State primary? So my thoughts are that I know very little about the candidates in terms of their policy because I know that there's a guy named Lumage who's running in the primary. I know that Themis is running in the primary. I think the Republican Party would probably be foolish from a strategic standpoint to not have Themis get that ticket. And the reason I say that is because she's the one that's actually got the name recognition. And it's just completely useless to put somebody who's representative of the party platform onto the ticket unless they're there to actually win. Right? Like you're wasting resources on a seat you're not going to win. I've talked about this with the Libertarian Party here in Connecticut, and Dan Reel agrees with me. Most of the Libertarians in Connecticut disagree with me. You should be running to win. You should always be running to win. It costs a lot of time, energy, money to have a campaign in the first place, to put somebody onto a ballot. Don't expend that time, money, energy. Don't go through the process of doing that unless you're going to win. I think all of the people I've seen speak in terms of their candidacy for the primary, I think that they've all seemed to be representing the values of the core values in general of the Republican Party. Themis just has the machine behind her. She's got the name recognition behind her. She's the one who didn't take the time to come to New Milford for when New Milford was having these presentations. She's the one that sent her campaign manager, which is not good optics. But, as far as the primary is concerned, the primary is who you're going to put on the ballot. The primary isn't who you're putting in the office. The primary is who you're putting on the ballot. And if you're going to put somebody on the ballot, it ought to be somebody who's there to win it. And to me, as long as they meet a minimum threshold, it's okay to put them on the ballot. But that's all we're talking about in terms of philosophy and policy, right? Meet the minimum threshold to get onto the Republican ticket in terms of your philosophy and policy. And then the one that goes on there is the one that has a chance to win in the general. This is why the libertarians in Connecticut and I disagree. That I think the Libertarian Party is wasting its time running a gubernatorial candidate. It's Dr. Aaron Lewis this year. I think they're wasting time, money, and energy running somebody in that spot. What they should instead be focusing on are places where they have a chance. Places like Union, Connecticut. If you're going to go into like northeastern Connecticut, where there's super red districts, and go to like their town councils and their board of selectmen and their boards of education, where you can have a libertarian sit in these seats and not take seats away from Republicans. So therefore, in those towns, if libertarians centralize their efforts, if you tell me as a libertarian that there's a libertarian running for the board of ed in Union, Connecticut, and they've got a chance, I would much rather take my $100 and send all $100 to that one candidate who has a chance than break it up into 20 candidates where there's maybe one or two that have a chance, but they're only going to get $5 in my campaign money because we're dividing it by 20. So that's what I take on this. Like, if I was a Republican voting in the primary, I would probably vote for Themis again because she's got the best chance. And it's a colossal uphill battle against both Blumenthal and Murphy. And I forget who's, let's look this up. I can't remember if it's Blumenthal. Who is up for re-election? Serving with Chris Murphy, assumed office in 2016, so that'd be 17, which means he would assume office in, so it's Richard Blumenthal that she's running against. Themis Claritas, Peter Lumage, and Leora Levy. Yeah, again, I like all of them. They seem to be fine, but the one you put on the ballot, if they're all fine, is the one that has the best chance of getting elected. And yeah, against Blumenthal, that is going to be a gigantic uphill battle because there's no breakup of geography. It's just all of Connecticut votes in these things. So since all of Connecticut includes places like Bridgeport, Hartford, New Britain, Meriden, Southington, Cheshire, if we're going to be talking about these places like Bridgeport, like you've got a giant uphill battle to get to actually win these seats. And the places where where I get, I'm rambling here. They probably would be wise to nominate Claritas just because she's got the machine behind her and has the best chance to get elected. Okay, Rebecca. These are the Senate candidates. Yeah, Blumenthal's who they will be running against. Quite frankly, too, I'm going to say this: she has the machine behind her. Like Claritas is going to win. Claritas is definitely going to win. I don't think it's going to be close. I think it's going to be probably in the area of 75 points. I think that she's going to get to 75 points, and the margin is probably going to be in the area of 50 or more points. Again, because she was the majority leader. Sorry, she was the House Minority Leader in Connecticut for years. She was a member of the House GOP for years. I think she served in the House and the Connecticut Senate for a few years too. Her family has been in politics forever. She's got the name recognition. She actually is kind of based as hell too. So in terms of policy, I kind of agree with them on a lot of things. I have Billy Mo Buckby is somebody I trust when it comes to his takes on people. He really likes Themis too. I think she's going to win on a landslide, and it's probably the wise choice strategically for Republicans to go ahead and stick with her on that matter. So that seems to cover everything. Hopefully we'll be back. We'll be back next week at 7:30 with our interview with Steve Harding. So tune into that so you guys can stay informed on all things news and politics here in New Milford. Special thanks to everyone who's stayed tuned tonight. Special thanks to Rebecca, who's apparently been pretty proactive, and to Leslie too, who were pretty active on tonight's show and who has stuck it through on what is a way over our normal 1 hour. So genuine thanks to the community of people who have been following me do this especially from day one. And that will continue on and next week, where we will see you at 7:30. And until then,